It hadn't been long since Nate assumed the role of manager at the office, but he promptly decided to disrupt the established order. His first action was to reduce salaries, including his own, displaying his inherent greed. He slashed the salaries of nearly all the staff members, causing many of them to submit their resignation letters on the very same day. Those who remained didn't have any intention of staying, but the lack of immediate alternatives compelled them to endure the tyrant's behavior. Almost half of the staff had departed by this point. Nate justified his actions by claiming that certain positions were redundant and repetitive. As a result, the remaining employees were burdened with double the workload. At times, they had to work late into the night. Even the janitor, who was already poorly compensated, fell victim to his antics and decided to quit. The most pressing issue now was finding a replacement for the janitor position, which offered meager wages. No one was willing to spend their entire day mopping floors and polishing doorknobs for such low pay. Mrs. Bennett, the HR manager, made daily efforts to persuade Nate to increase the janitor's salary, explaining that they would never find a suitable candidate with such compensation. During the staff meetings held every morning, Nate incessantly complained about the office's overall dirtiness and dustiness. In reality, the office was becoming increasingly dirty by this time. One such morning meeting, when Nate was venting about every little issue in the office, left everyone astonished. This particular branch of the company was functioning perfectly well. After reviewing the weekly reports, Nate turned his attention to the unresolved janitor problem. In an almost shouting manner, he warned Mrs. Bennett, "If you don't find a janitor soon, I'll make cleaning a part of your direct responsibilities." Mrs. Bennett was on the verge of fleeing from this miserly lunatic, but given her age, finding another job wasn't so easy. Therefore, whenever Nate raised the topic, she silently listened to his unreasonable approaches and demands, later soothing herself with anti-anxiety pills in her office. During the subsequent morning meeting, the manager once again expressed his dissatisfaction with Mrs. Bennett's work, emphasizing that a janitor had yet to be hired. "Is it really that challenging to find a cleaner?" he angrily exclaimed, slowly approaching the window. At some point, he silently froze, fixating his gaze on something in the distance near the garbage cans. A poorly dressed woman was carefully arranging cardboard boxes. Nate's smile turned cunning as he looked back at Mrs. Bennett and remarked, "So, you claim that no one is willing to join our company for that pay? Well, watch and learn, rookies." He flung the window wide open, taking advantage of the pleasant warmth outside. "Hey, come in for a moment. I have an offer you might be interested in," Nate called out, but the girl continued her work without pausing for even a second, diligently tending to the cardboard boxes. The boss was surprised, but he wasn't about to give up. There was a glimmer of excitement in his eyes as he persisted, "Hey, do you need some cash? Come over here," he shouted once more. However, the girl remained focused on her task, which irritated the boss. He turned to Mrs. Bennett, instructing her to fetch the security guard. When the security guard hurried into the conference room, Nate commanded him, "Bring that girl near the dump to me, pronto." He muttered under his breath, unhappy with the guy in the uniform. A few minutes later, the girl entered the office. After several unsuccessful attempts to communicate with her, it became evident that she was completely deaf. She appeared to have a hearing aid, but it either wasn't functioning properly or was a cheap model. Surprisingly, the beggar-looking girl, who seemed to be around 30 years old, was quite tidy up close. Her hands, clothes, and hair were clean. The absence of makeup made her face appear even younger and lighter. Her hair was neatly tied in a bun. Though her clothes looked worn and ill-fitting, they didn't emit any unpleasant odors. Suddenly remembering that deaf individuals can read lips, the boss enunciated each syllable slowly, asking, "Do you understand what I am saying?" The girl nodded, indicating comprehension. Continuing, Nate offered her a job, explaining that she wouldn't have to do much, just clean the office. He concluded, "So, what do you say?" The girl stood there in silence for a couple of minutes, surveying her surroundings, before eventually nodding in agreement. Nate beamed with pride, feeling victorious. He turned to Mrs. Bennet, who had been silently observing the situation. "Can't find a cleaning lady? Maybe you've forgotten how to hire people. Well, consider this a lesson for you." Even this worthless person was willing to accept a lower salary. "By the way, before you inform her, think about reducing it a bit," he suggested, but upon seeing Mrs. Bennet's expression, he realized he had gone too far. Even a homeless girl would reject such paltry compensation. He abandoned the idea. The deaf girl, whose name was Lauren, started working diligently. She always arrived at the office on time, sometimes even earlier than the designated start time. She diligently washed, cleaned, and wiped every surface she encountered. Within just a week, the office underwent a remarkable transformation, but the team's attitude toward their deaf colleague remained unchanged. They frequently targeted her with cruel and mocking jokes, relishing the fact that she couldn't hear them. Although her hearing aid was old and of poor quality, she could still catch snippets of the hurtful things people said about her and her work. Despite enduring constant harassment, Lauren had experienced hardship in life and managed to maintain her composure. She always looked forward to leaving work and returning to her humble abode on the outskirts of town, an old and abandoned shack. Lauren wasn't alone in her small dwelling, she had taken in several stray pets. Her companions included 3 kittens, a cat, 2 dogs, and a parrot with a broken wing. These animals provided her with constant companionship and served as a source of comfort and love. Their presence helped her cope with the daily mistreatment she faced at work. During the nighttime, while she ensured her own basic needs were met, she always made sure to prepare something delectable for her furry companions. Their affectionate gazes were enough to make up for a long day's work. Mrs. Bennet was extremely pleased with the cleaning lady's impeccable work, which kept the office immaculate. However, her colleagues continued to ridicule her behind her back. As for the manager, Nate, he still remained unimpressed with her performance. He couldn't quite pinpoint what he expected from her. Over time, though, the girl's quiet demeanor and intelligent eyes began to earn her the respect of her colleagues. Even those who had previously mocked Lauren started to realize that her past was more complex than they had assumed. Despite her beggarly appearance, she possessed eloquence and literacy. Her speech was concise yet insightful, often catching her colleagues off guard with her clever and thought-provoking remarks. It seemed as though she had a deep understanding of many subjects but chose not to reveal it. It became evident to them that her current circumstances did not reflect her intelligence or abilities. The office environment grew tense and stressful, with Nate, the boss, displaying aggressive behavior during morning meetings. He seemed to blame others for the company's declining performance, which had taken a significant hit. Consequently, the increasingly bitter boss began to lay off employees regularly, sometimes firing multiple individuals at once. This only exacerbated the negative atmosphere and uncertainty among the remaining staff. Rumors circulated among the co-workers, suggesting that soon Nate would be the sole survivor in the office. Nolan, the company's owner and CEO, began visiting the branch more frequently due to the sudden decline in profits. Unfortunately, Nate exploited this opportunity to intimidate and pressure the employees, aiming to create a positive image for Nolan during his visits. Despite Nate's efforts, Nolan, who had built the company from scratch, refused to let it fail. He took action to turn things around. After several visits to what was once a successful branch, Nolan noticed an underlying unease among the employees. In response, he announced that the company would undergo a comprehensive cleaning process, granting all employees, including the manager, a paid day off. Even those who declined would still be paid. During this time, Nolan installed concealed cameras throughout the office, all connected to his personal computer. He wanted to uncover the truth about what was truly happening within the office and take decisive action to salvage the business he had diligently built. Nolan devoted himself to monitoring the office every day, from opening to closing. He meticulously collected information and evidence to understand the reasons behind the branch's decline. One day, during a meeting, Nolan was presented with a meticulously crafted business development plan that caught him off guard. He swiftly perused the material and glanced up at Nate in surprise. Holding up the business plan, Nolan inquired, "What is this?" Nate realized that Nolan was genuinely intrigued by the content and humbly responded, "I worked very hard on it, sir. I didn't sleep for several nights. I truly hope you like it." The first peculiar thing that struck Nolan was the neat, feminine handwriting. Having read numerous reports written by Nick, he was familiar with his messy scrawl. Further investigation provided more clues that Nate's mind was as convoluted and erratic as his handwriting. Nolan reviewed the recorded videos and was astonished to discover that the cleaning lady had spent considerable time working on the documents late into the night. She remained completely focused and absorbed in her work, losing track of time. Moreover, she effortlessly created graphs and diagrams, as if she had been doing it for years. Nolan felt remorseful for overlooking so many things within his own branch. The following morning, Nate received a summons to Nolan's office. He hurriedly entered, but as soon as he caught sight of Nolan's expression, he abruptly halted. Standing there, his gaze fixed on the ground, he endured Nolan's scolding. The entire office was paralyzed, too afraid to utter a word or make a move, fearing the wrath of their boss. "Do you realize that your deceit and dishonesty nearly brought the branch to ruin?" Nolan exclaimed furiously. "I am utterly astonished at the loss of exceptional employees due to your arrogant behavior. You terminated all the top-notch workers I had painstakingly selected over the years." Attempting to interject, Nate stammered, "Nolan, let me explain." Cutting him off, Nolan declared, "I don't need your explanation. I initially thought you might be testing some technique, but when you tried to claim credit for someone else's work, that was the final straw." Nolan composed himself and continued, "Calm down. You have 10 minutes to gather your belongings and leave." The once confident manager appeared suddenly defeated, his face drained of color, as he made his way towards the exit. At that moment, Nate overheard Nolan instructing his secretary to bring in the cleaning lady, a young woman named Lauren, who was deaf. As Lauren quietly entered the office, Nolan gestured for her to take a seat. "Please, have a seat. I'd like to learn more about you. Obviously, you possess intelligence and haven't been disadvantaged throughout your life," Nolan initiated the conversation. The girl, somewhat puzzled, confirmed his observation. As she began speaking, Nolan realized that despite her deafness, she was far from unintelligent. She gazed out the window as she softly shared her story. Lauren grew up in an impoverished family, but from a young age, she had a passion for acquiring knowledge. Despite the challenging circumstances within her household, where her parents would engage in drunken fights at night, she dedicated herself to her studies. From the 3rd grade until she graduated, she sought solace in an abandoned house near her apartment, using it as a study refuge on nights when her parents were consumed by alcohol. In the morning, she would quietly slip back home to gather her belongings in a backpack while her family was still asleep, rushing off to school. Despite the adversity, Lauren excelled academically and easily gained acceptance into a business school. She was a bright and determined student, well liked by her teachers. She possessed a natural aptitude for grasping concepts swiftly and was always eager to assist her classmates. It came as no surprise when Lauren graduated with the highest GPA. Business administration became her favorite subject and lifelong aspiration. It was during her time at university that she encountered her first love, Connor, who was a year ahead. The moment they laid eyes on each other in the university's east hallway, they knew they had fallen deeply in love. However, their relationship faced disapproval from Connor's affluent family, especially the notion of their son marrying a financially challenged, albeit intelligent, woman. Nevertheless, their love was so powerful that Connor proposed to Lauren, expressing his desire to spend the rest of his life with her. One day, Lauren and her fiancé, Connor, set off to visit her friends outside the city. They were filled with joy, particularly because their wedding was just a week away. They neared their friend's country house, where everyone eagerly awaited their arrival. Suddenly, a dense fog descended, obscuring everything in a white haze. They were unaware of the oncoming car until its headlights shone directly into their windshield. With a horrendous screech of metal and a deafening crash, Lauren regained consciousness only to find herself already inside an ambulance. Her first concern was for her fiancé's well-being. Upon learning that he had tragically passed away, she fainted. When she awoke in the hospital room, a profound realization washed over her. Something had changed forever in her life. From that moment onward, she was deaf. The doctors, unable to explain the sudden loss of her hearing, attributed it to stress. Despite her hearing impairment and fragile mental state, she pleaded with the doctors to allow her to attend her lover's funeral. Unfortunately, she was denied even the opportunity to visit his grave. Connor's parents held her responsible for the accident, blaming her and her less affluent friends for going to the country house. Connor's mother, in a fit of rage, hurled insults at her, threatening to make her life miserable. She belittled Lauren, saying that the best job she could hope for was a janitorial position, and she would live with regret for ruining her son's life. At that moment, the despondent Lauren regretted not being the one who had died instead of Connor. She felt utterly unwanted, as her own mother would swiftly change roommates and eventually burn down their house during drunken episodes. Her life was a series of setbacks: no job, no home, no love, and now, no hearing. Finding employment became nearly impossible, as no one showed interest in hiring a deaf and vulnerable beggar. Initially, she taught herself to lip read, and eventually managed to earn a meager income by cleaning at the local market. She used that money to purchase a cheap hearing aid that provided limited assistance in hearing some words. From then on, she aimlessly wandered, finding solace in a small shed where she sought shelter. Despite her dire circumstances, she never complained about her life, having experienced so much unfairness. She found contentment in her beloved pets, who became her closest companions. However, a constant worry nagged at her: the well-being of her pets during cold weather, as the unheated room in the abandoned house posed a risk of freezing. Nolan sat there in silence, attentively listening to her heart-wrenching tale. As she recounted the tragic accident involving Connor, he felt deep sorrow for what had befallen her. On that very day, he extended an extraordinary offer to Lauren, a highly esteemed business graduate, to become the new executive director of the branch. To his satisfaction, she accepted. The branch rapidly improved under her leadership, and Nolan frequented visits, often seen picking up Lauren from work. In due time, their colleagues learned of their relationship, and news of their marriage spread throughout the company. Nolan surprised her with a perfect gift, an animal shelter certificate, securing a home for all her cherished pets. As she settled into her new home with her husband, her responsibilities prevented her from personally caring for her pets, but they resided safely in the shelter. Moreover, Lauren joyfully anticipated the arrival of their baby boy. When Nolan received the news, he was elated. However, there was yet another miracle in Lauren's life that defied medical explanation: her hearing suddenly returned, as if it had never been lost. She became fully functional once more. The expansive and roomy residence of the entrepreneur overflowed with a cozy and inviting atmosphere, truly embodying the essence of a home. I would love to hear your thoughts on the story and its characters. How would you approach the situation differently? Feel free to share your insights, as they might provide valuable guidance for those going through challenging times. If you enjoyed this narrative, please consider showing your support by liking and subscribing for more engaging content. Don't forget to click the notification bell to stay updated. Thank you, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.